Whoever we need is here, Dr. Kincannon.
Yes, we have a quorum and our presenters are here.
Okay. With my computer. So Dr. Kincannon, I'll let you just take it away.
Great. Would you like to call the meeting to order?
Yes. Meeting called to order.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone.
Great. Thank you. All right. We welcome everyone back. I believe this is meeting number 7. We're excited about continuing our conversation regarding elementary schools this evening. But before we do that, we're going to have a special presentation by our demographer, Bob Templeton, and we're going to give him about 20 minutes. So we'll let him get started. Josh, I believe, access to do that.
Yes, he does have the ability to share his screen if he
Great. And then I would ask that you all hold your questions until he's finished, and then we'll have the opportunity to answer questions. So, Mr. Bob Templeton.
Well, thank you. Good evening. It is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. And I will now start sharing my screen. So give me 1 second.
As needed, Bob, we're set up to do that as well for you.
Okay. Okay, can you see the screen okay? It looks like we're going with Jared's screen. So if you'll get down to the demographic portion. Okay, well, good evening. Good to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Bob Templeton with Templeton Demographics. We've been fortunate to work with Waco for the last couple of years. We work with about 80 school districts across the state of Texas. In this most unusual year, we are seeing some unusual trends related to the COVID-19's impact on the economy and the impact on enrollment. I'll start with the next slide. If you'll advance to the next slide. Just taking a quick look at the enrollment history for the last several years, you'll notice that this year's enrollment did decline by about 329 students, which was a drop of about 2.2%. The biggest share of that decline did happen at those elementary grade levels. It was the kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, all of your elementary grade levels did see the biggest drop in the enrollment. We also had a pretty significant decline in 6th grade, but this was seen all across the state of Texas. This was not anything specific to the Waco school district. The high school grades actually held on pretty well, so we did not see a significant decline in the high school grades. That was also seen across the state. So it was primarily those elementary, middle school grades where we did see the biggest drop. Most of our clients experienced about a 4 to 5% drop in the enrollment. So Waco dropping about 2.2% was much better than what we saw in most of our Central Texas clients. Next slide. Just touching on the economic impacts that we've seen over the last year. Prior to the pandemic, the unemployment rate was at near 50-year lows. We were in that 3.6 to 4% range for the unemployment rate in the state of Texas and in the Waco MSA. And then when the pandemic started in March of 2020, the unemployment rate for the state shot up to about 13%. The Waco MSA's unemployment rate shot up to about 10.5%. And when we began to reopen over last summer, it dropped down to about 6%, and it has stayed at about 6% for the last several months. We do expect, as we get more of the vaccines rolled out, more of our population with the vaccines and more of the businesses reopening, especially in the leisure, hospitality, the restaurant industries. Once we get back to, we'll see a significant or continued decline in those unemployment rates. Next slide. Now, some of the economic highlights: Amazon Distribution Center is building in the Waco area. It's a $215 million complex with over 700,000 square feet. And the groundwork is starting and should open fall of 2021. We've got Hello Bello, which is a diaper distribution and manufacturing center, which is scheduled to open in Waco. It's about a 312,000 square foot facility, adding about 145 new positions, about a $31 million investment into the facility. Its grand opening is also anticipated this summer of 2021. Next slide. Now, I touched on this earlier, that we are seeing this trend all across the state of Texas. So here's a map of the Texas school districts. If you'll back up a slide. I'm sorry, okay.
There's an automatic advance on the slide.
Yes, so something happened now. I apologize. I'm not seeing the screen any longer.
Jessica, can you go back one slide? And Bob, we're on the Texas slide.
Okay. So we are sharing my screen now. Okay. So the states, for the first time in our history, we saw a drop in the enrollment. It was negative 122,000 kids. First time in our history that we saw this drop. We believe that the enrollment should have been at about 5.5 million students had we not had the pandemic. So we are forecasting that October of 2021, the state is likely to see growth of about 200 to 240,000 kids. Now, when we look at the region, Region 12 and Region 13, you can see I've got a little blue dashed circle around Waco ISD. And during the 5-year period between 2015 and 2020, there was about a 3.5% decrease in enrollment. And during this past year, we actually saw 3.2%. So a majority of that decrease actually happened this past year. Region 12 as a whole did see a decline in enrollment of about negative 1.8%, which was a decline of about 3,312 students. So all across Region 12, the enrollment dropped pretty significantly. Region 13, just to the south, saw that drop as well, where it dropped about 3,000, that drop was a drop of about 3%, which represents about 11,000 students. Okay. The district demographic snapshot, the overall population for the district has grown about 8.7%. It's grown from about 103,000 to about 113,000. The total population below the age of 19 has gone up about 6.1%. The median household income has gone up about 32%, and the number of households has gone up about 9.6%. Year-to-date home sales, this has been a little bit of a surprise. The housing market is seeing some incredible growth in the prices and in the values. And so year-to-date sales have actually gone up about 9.2%. The average price has gone up to 9.7%. Median price has gone up 12.2%. The number of listings is down 71%. The inventory, existing home inventory, is also down about 73%. This is related to the pandemic. So the pandemic has caused existing homeowners to be hesitant to list their homes for sale. It's the concern about having traffic through their homes during the pandemic, which has caused a shortage of supply of existing homes, which is helping to or contributing to the increase in the overall prices for housing. And we're seeing this also all across the state of Texas. Total number of home sales for within Waco ISD, you can see it's been averaging about 2,000 home sales per year, well above 2,000 over the last several years. Year to date through the first quarter is about 490 is the total home sales within Waco ISD for the first quarter. So we do expect that total home sales are going to be up above 2,000 again for 2021. Now, just kind of give you the big picture. So here's a map of your elementary attendance zones, and I've zoomed into, the majority of the elementary schools within Waco. We are tracking some multifamily and some single family, but you'll notice a majority of the Waco boundary is primarily built out. We do have some vacant land in the southern part of the district and in the eastern part of the district, and that yellow shaded area represents some future single family homes. The turquoise represents some future multifamily projects that we're tracking. The small purple shaded areas are some multifamily that's currently under construction. We've got about 335 multifamily units that are currently under construction. And some of those are college type, which would have a very low impact of students. We've got about another 1,125 multifamily units that are in various stages of development. Some of that is senior units, so they would have a zero impact. But we are tracking some pretty significant development out here in South Waco, which does represent about 350 to potentially 500 single family homes out in this location in the South Waco Elementary Attendance Zone. To get some of those details, the Lakes University Parks, it's 160 total lots. There's 57 occupied. We've got very few students in there right now. About 5 students is all we had in our geocode for the Lakes at University Park. There is, additional lots. There's some future phases there that represents about 91 that are in the final plat for phase 4. That price point starts at about 150,000. Likely it's going to be well over 200,000 due to the increase in cost of construction. The Lakes is a future development that represents about 285 acres of development. It is currently under review with the city, so it's still in the preliminary planning stages. Lennar is the builder that's looking to build in this development, but it represents about 350 future lots. So when that gets approved, or should it get approved, it would likely go fairly quickly because Lennar is a production type builder. Now looking at the transfer patterns, this is data from the Texas Education Agency. The top table represents the transfers into the district. And you can see over the last several years, back in 2015, we were transferring in 179 students. That jumped up to about 298 students during the last school year. This year, it dropped to about 257. That change likely had something to do with COVID-19 concerns, but overall, the 5-year period, we have seen an increase in the number of students transferring in over the last 5 years. The bottom portion of this table represents those students that live within the boundary of Waco ISD, but are transferring to either nearby public schools or to charter schools. You can see we've seen a pretty significant increase there as well, where back in 2015, we were transferring in about 2,149 students. It was 2,512 in 2019, and it dropped this year to about 2,476. You'll notice that Harmony Science Academy, that charter school, does represent the largest area that students are transferring to. The next one is the Rappaport Academy. That's also seeing about 645. And then we've got 216 that are transferring to the Waco charter schools. Now here's a look at the overall picture for charters. Charter schools are expanding at a very large degree across the state of Texas. During this past fall, we have 365,930 students that are attending charter schools in Texas. These stars do represent those charter school campuses. You'll notice they are concentrated in the major metropolitan areas: Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, but they literally are adding dozens of campuses each year. And so we do expect this surge in enrollment to continue. Now here's a look at the projections. So we are building in a little bit of a bounce back from the COVID pandemic for next year's enrollment, which would put next year's, this is October of 2021's enrollment, at 14,825. And then you'll notice the enrollment does decline. Now, this is partially due to the drop in the birth rate that we're seeing within the Waco ISD boundary. And then in the latter part of the forecast, it starts to grow again. So we are building in some growth down the road as a result of some single family growth that's located in that South Waco area. At the campus level, start with the elementary campuses. You'll notice that this year's total elementary number is about 7,532. So within about 5 years, it gets to 7,713. So we're building in a little bit of a COVID return. There is some growth. You'll notice that South Waco Elementary Zone is growing to about 530 kids in 5 years. And then you've got Parkdale, which is one of your larger elementaries, at about 610 enrollment. And then Bells Hill Elementary stays in that 748 to 730 range over the next 5-year period. At the secondary campuses, the middle schools, they'll stay at about 2,800 for the next 1 to 2 years. And then that enrollment settles at about 2,712. Your largest middle schools are Cesar Chavez Middle School at almost 900 in 5 years. And then Tennyson Middle School will be at about 939 in 2023. And then it levels off just under 900 in 2025. Your high schools, University High School will stay in that just shy of 1,900 students for the foreseeable future. And Waco High stays in that 21 to 2,200 range for the next 5-year period. Key takeaways, then I'll be ready to answer some questions. Waco ISD enrollment is down about 330 students due to the COVID-19 pandemic concerns. The district's kindergarten class is expected to continue to decline due to the drop in the number of births within the Waco ISD. Waco ISD has more than 450 planned future lots under review in the South Waco Elementary Zone. That should help the district to grow a little bit in the latter part of this forecast. In 5 years, we're expecting the enrollment to be at about 14,630. And in 10 years, the enrollment could get to about 14,831. I apologize for those technical challenges on the presenting part on my end. Yeah, I'm not sure what was happening there, but let me know if you have any questions.
Bob, there were a couple of questions in the chat. One was about why Region 13's drop was a little bit larger than Region 12. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I believe it is partially tied to how those districts started the school year. Many of those school districts in Austin, specifically Austin ISD, and the majority of those districts started 100% virtually. We did see that districts that had a blended start had a little bit higher return. And so I believe that's also one of the factors. The other factor is they had a large number of charter schools that opened in Austin this year. So those two factors led to that big decline in Region 13.
Okay. And another question that you may or may not know, Chris had asked about what these numbers look like if you take out Waco and Guama, and I think that's specific to students who are not part of Waco ISD, but attending Waco and Guama.
Yeah, I'd have to look further into that to understand the context of that question, but I'd be happy to do that.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Templeton? All right. And I think there was, Jessica, one more slide there that talked about the boundaries and attendance zones for Alta Vista, Waco, South Waco, and Kendrick.
So yes, I was asked to kind of zoom into the South Waco area, and on this slide, those red outlines represent the current elementary attendance zones. So you can see the Alta Vista zone is,
it's kind of C-shaped.
yes, and so part of the zone does go across I-35, and then we've got the dots are color coded to their attending campus. So the yellow dots are students that are attending Alta Vista. The red dots are attending Kendrick. The green dots are attending Bells Hill. The blue dots are attending South Waco. And so then I was asked to kind of provide a little bit of a breakdown of those Alta Vista elementary students. So there are 201 students that live east of I-35. That would be east of I-35, this particular area. There's about 205 students that live west of I-35. And there's about 40 students. You can see some of the yellow dots scattered throughout the other zones. So about 40 students that are coming from the other elementary zones within Waco ISD. And there are 17 students that are coming from outside the district, for a total of about 463 students that are attending Alta Vista Elementary School.
Great. It definitely gives us some insight where students are coming from and where they're attending, and feeds definitely right into our next question. And we'll pause just one more time, see if there are any final questions for Mr. Templeton. Otherwise, we'll shoot over.
Yeah, a quick question just about the new manufacturing and distribution centers, the Amazon and the Hello Bello and other things like that. The jobs that will be created and people that we hire, do we expect that to be a sort of a shuffling of the deck of employees who are already in Waco leaving their current jobs to take those jobs? Do we expect people moving into Waco? What kind of trends do we expect to see? And second, birth rate decline, is that happening nationally? Is that something we expect to maybe rebound after COVID?
You know, it is happening nationally, so it's not just a Waco phenomenon. You know, we do see that when families are distressed financially, that can cause a pause on the decisions of having children. So we are hopeful that we will see the birth rate pick back up again. Also, the millennials are historically the millennials have waited to marry, waited to make some of those big life decisions. And so many of them had delayed that decisions to have kids. Well, now they're getting into those years where it'll start to pick up as well. So we're hopeful that the millennials getting into their 30s, and that sounds kind of strange that that's when the millennials are starting to have their kids. And the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic should create some optimism around the finances, which should help the birth rate as well. Now, to your Amazon question, yes, there will be people moving into the region from outside the region due to the Amazon and the Hello Bello expansion. So I've got, my daughter is actually moving to Gatesville. He is going to be working at the hospital, and they were visiting with some new folks in their area that were going to work at the Amazon distribution center, and they were coming from out of state, and they were exploring housing in the general region. So I think we will see families moving into the region for those jobs. I'm going to stick around for a bit, so but I'll be ready to answer any additional questions, or if I need to look up anything that I can on my end, I can certainly be ready to help with that as well.
Great, I appreciate it, Bob. All right, Jessica, if you want to pull up the presentation, we'll kind of really build on that last slide focused around the geographic location, but it takes us right into the elementary school strategies here as we move forward. And so last time, as we look at the challenge around elementary schools, we focused on the various needs, much like we did on the other campuses, from the $200 million identified for the facility condition assessment, all the way down to the impact on operational needs in terms of abilities for teaching staff and those kind of things. And ultimately, as we looked at the elementary schools, along with all the other grade levels, we really wanted to identify, if we were asked the question, what is the highest and best use of funds? How would we want to move forward? And so that really takes us back to, really focused on Alta Vista, Kendrick, and South Waco. And I come back to this slide of just number one, that from a geographic location, these are three campuses that are in proximity to each other, but that really pairs then with point number two about the need to address the facility condition assessment and the educational suitability needs across the campuses. And then finally, three, just like you heard Bob identify, is, we think about growth and we think about number of students enrolled in the campuses, and ultimately, how do these pair well together? And ultimately, as we talk about that highest and best use of funds moving forward, this really sticks out as a priority here as we move forward. To dive a little bit deeper into that, we wanted to dive into the campuses, much like a facility tour, and we were able to see one of these here, which was actually Kendrick along the way. And starting at a broad level, we of course look at the site. Here's Kendrick Elementary School, a little over 10 acres. This campus was originally built, if you go on to the next slide, was built in 1952. And as you can tell from the architecture, the building was actually exterior corridors. They've come back later and actually closed in the corridors to create an internal circulation campus. Roughly, it can support 500 students. And ultimately has a large FCA need just to maintain the building here at the bare minimum level. We always look as well as core and cafeteria, the cafeteria space and the library space, and then as well as classrooms, making sure that they're appropriately sized and can support the school. As we look at the next campus, as we look at South Waco, here, this is much closer to a typical elementary school site in terms of size. We usually talk about 15 to 20 acres of space. So here we see Kendrick not only supports the campus that you see on the left, which is actually the north side, and public baseball fields or community baseball fields the district is partnered with there on the right side. As we look inside of this facility, and we talk about the age, we're able to confirm that this was originally built in '89. It does support 820 students, a little bit lower from the FCA need, but there are some challenges in terms of the cafeteria and the library and how we move forward. So I did not mention right now what would be proposed on Kendrick is to rebuild that facility to a modernized facility. Here at South Waco, we would look at augmenting and renovating portions of the building or a good portion of the building to implement best practices for learning environments today. So we might get rid of that lime green unless we really love it here moving forward. And then finally, Alta Vista Elementary School, and this is one of the greatest challenges in terms of the site size, being just a touch over 5 acres. That again, we usually look at a minimum of 15 up to 20 for an elementary school site. And then as we look inside the building, this has some of the oldest facilities within the district, starting in 1910, then with additions later in '89. Capacity is roughly 500 students. FCA of 10.2 million, but ultimately the challenge to be able to bring this up to a modern facility is pretty great in terms of site size and the existing materials there. And so at this one, we would looked at shifting, worked with Bob and his team over time to bring it in, take these students and put them into Southwest and Kendrick zones there. So as we look at those campuses, this ultimately brings us back into focus of the facility master plan. And we present the goals again for the elementary school long-term vision about addressing the schools with the highest need, being able to provide additional education support staff and operational efficiencies, and ultimately align the campuses and capacities with the projections over the 10-year need and multiple bond program. We looked at those two groups of facilities. And so Jessica, if you'll give us one more click here, ultimately that leads us towards that focus on the facility master plan, which we would identify as that immediate priority is addressing Kendrick, South Waco, and Alta Vista. But that long term is over time, the district, the board, the community would continue an implementation of the long-term vision goals across that entire portfolio of Waco ISD elementary school campuses, that this is really providing that roadmap to be able to guide decisions today as well as in the future. So I will take a pause there, or actually we're going to shift over to an activity unless there are any questions, but want to ask everybody as we've come back to this idea, as we've presented the information, is ultimately you've had an opportunity to think about it. We wanted to make sure that this elementary school long-term the vision goals, along with the immediate and long-term priorities identified, are that highest and best approach to meeting the needs of the Waco ISD community. So we would love for everybody to take out their phone and be able to vote, and it is activated. So if you remember, you can text to the phone number 22333. Text would be OCR 1950, and then you would respond 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from strongly agree to strongly disagree, or you can do it online. We'll give everybody here just a couple more minutes. Had about 20 responses so far. Almost here to 30 responses, and looks like many of y'all strongly agree, with a few in the middle or slightly disagreeing.
Jared, I saw a question in the chat room. I think it would help me too. Defining more succinctly what it is we have narrowed down to highest and best approaches. It seems it's a little bit abstract or vague for me. I mean, I think I want to agree, but I'm not entirely sure what you might think I'm agreeing to.
I think ultimately what we're looking at saying is that we want to align with the facility long-term vision goals. So ultimately that we do want the highest and best use, that we're looking at opportunities to provide the best educational staff and operational efficiencies, and then as well align with demographic projections. And so, yes, those are kind of high level statements and goals that is part of the focus of the facility master plan. But based on the data that was presented, and we went into it a little bit deeper last time, but that first slide kind of had 5 slides from the facility condition assessment, educational suitability, and
Right.
ultimately, when we look at that data, that was the slide with the 3 numbers on it, that Kendrick, South Waco, and Alta Vista are the ones with the highest need.
I
So
got
we're saying that that's the priority number 1, and then priority as we move forward, we'll come back to the goals and address things across the facility master plan.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess I'm sort of, we struggled pretty mightily with how to draw the attendance zones for those 3 schools 9 years ago. And I still, you know, we came up with an answer. I don't think anybody was particularly happy with the answer. I also don't see a clear path from here forward on how to address those same issues that are in existence now. Maybe you've got some ideas, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here.
So I think Carrie, you definitely hit on one of the key topics that will come up as we move forward. I think the way that we're approaching it is really first address what does the facility need and kind of balance between those two. But ultimately, there would be a boundary process that would have to occur later as that is moving forward.
It's hard to keep Interstate 35 out of it, as I remember. But it's also interesting. South Waco is where our potential seems to be where our potential for growth is.
Correct. And if you look at the Bob's information, roughly the Alta Vista students were split half and half between I-35. You know, so there are some natural boundaries there that could apply.
And can I, Carrie, did you have another question, or can I jump in here?
Well, I guess the only other thing that I would add to that, okay, is it possible to build an elementary school on the west side of 35 large enough to accommodate all the students that live west of 35? Can you make a Kendrick that big?
So what we've been talking about or been looking at is about a 750 student elementary school. Is generally the number that we've been talking about.
Okay.
It's right now, Kendrick's at roughly 550, 200 are on the west side. So there would be your 750. And part of that balance that we will have to look at is, you know, we don't want to build at capacity. So that number may bump to 800.
Yeah, I'd be tempted to suggest building it bigger, but okay, that's getting specific. Aaron, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So I really echo kind of your question about that this is a little bit vague, but Jared, if I'm understanding, this is a question about what do we, the 66 people on this call, hopefully we'll all vote on this. What do we value? Do we value looking at demographic trends, making plans over the next 5 to 10 years, and adopting some sort of plan so that our facilities meet the highest and best use for education? Do we agree with that, or are there things that we would be willing to compromise and say, we don't want the highest and best, most efficient thing because we like to preserve neighborhood schools or something like that? Because I mean, the conversation last time got into a lot of specifics about consolidation and taking places that are existing schools and turning them into other facilities that they would no longer be elementary schools. And so it sort of feels like, you know, are we asked to vote on, do we like that plan that we saw last time? Or are we kind of taking a step back and saying, after looking at the demographics and long-term trends and the facilities that are in dire need, I mean, things that are crumbling and are not happy places for teachers or students. And so based on that, do we want to adopt a plan that aligns with the highest and best use for our students and teachers? Or do we say, in spite of demographic trends and crumbling structures, we'd like to keep the status quo? Like, and I'm putting it in rather stark terms. I'm just trying to, like, who wouldn't want the highest and best use? So why wouldn't all be agree? But some people are saying, no, I don't agree. So I'm just trying to get clear on what you're asking us.
Sure. So I would say that we're asking for that, what is the highest and best use? So does the proposed strategy, in particular with Alta Vista, Kendrick, South Waco, align with that initial first step to a future? And I think part of the challenge becomes when we talk about elementary schools, there's 15, 16 campuses. We've identified some big rocks, I'll say, with the middle schools, with the high schools as well. And ultimately, how do you weigh all these out? And the committee has identified, man, I would love to have all these things and, starting to put rain. So what we're trying to do is set a framework around that. And we've kind of done the same thing for the high school and the middle school zones, as well as we really focused in on Waco High School, that we heard clearly from the community that was the highest need. At the middle school, that's where, there's 3 out of 4 become the highest need there. And at the elementary school, again, we picked 3 here that are continuing forward as that highest need within the district. And so then what is that best opportunity? The conversation hasn't changed really from last time. We've tried to provide additional data at this point.
Yeah.
I would
And I'm just curious, and if there's anybody on the, so I agree with the statement, and I voted that way. And I'd just be curious to hear if people disagree, why would you disagree with the highest and best use of our facilities for the teachers and the students in Waco ISD in light of the demographic trends? Or what am I missing? Because I found it to be persuasive. And what am I missing among our other of the 66 people on this call, some of whom I can't see? But what are you opposed to or questioning or don't understand?
So I think what I'm reading into the comments in the chat box is maybe we jumped in there fast this evening, and people were unclear about the plan that they were voting for, or the language in the question in the way that it was framed. But I think we're on track now. I think Jared has explained that. But if there is a reason that you would disagree with that, we feel we'd welcome your comments.
So this is Dr. Henry. So I did not answer the poll because I'm unclear what I was being asked. So I posed something of a question, and I'm wondering if this is the case. So is the question this: we agree that we want to focus on the schools that have the greatest need first, and then come back to the schools that are in less need at this point? Is that the question?
That's correct.
Okay, that was not at all clear in the question posed to us.
Yeah.
So if what we just said is what I just said, now I think that I can make a better decision.
Thank you. That we talked at our last meeting about prioritizing, and perhaps we should have done a little better job of reteaching that this evening. And I apologize for my voice cracking. I'll let Jared have it back.
So I think one, if you are interested, you can change your vote with those clarifications if you type in undo in your text, and then we can make sure that we're on the right page. And if you haven't voted, we would love for you to vote.
I guess.
Okay. And so I think, part of this is, us, we're trying to identify, and elementary schools are a bigger challenge here as we move forward, but we're also trying to come back to our larger discussion here of the direction of the facilities master plan. And so Jessica, if you will, go to the next one. And I think that you'll start seeing kind of how this is coming together in terms of, we have delved very deep into the specifics of campuses, and we're trying to back out to like that 50,000 square foot level. And so, or 50,000 foot level. And so really, as we look in the past, and we really look at all the things that we've covered, from the facility condition assessment, the demographics, we've gotten into the facility the educational suitability needs, and really work together to contrast those, understand them, and present them. And yes, Jessica, you can go to the end here. is, ultimately this is really founded in the highest hopes from this group here of what we started out. And you see that in the Wordle here in the center of really focused on keeping Waco a great place to be here in the heart of Texas. And really focused on, using the hot term for the night, the highest and best use of funds, students, for our teachers, and to be able to move forward in the design. And so as we look, as we've gone, deeper into each level and we back out, what we've started to do is try and identify a framework to help guide the master plan of what are the decisions. And as we make decisions, what are those key elements that we want to move forward? And so that first guiding principle we wanted to identify, again, think high level, 50,000 foot level, is really creating facilities throughout Waco ISD in support of the district's vision for academic excellence. So we're trying to really create facilities that support education, that support teacher retention, really create 21st century learning environments that create a great place to be. Goal number 2 is about ensuring equity across primary and secondary campuses for academic and co-curricular programs. So as we talk about exactly like Kendrick, Alta Vista, South Waco, we not only want to look at those 3 campuses, but we want to look across the district. We heard from several individuals, not only about look at the campus level, but how are we supporting special education? How are we supporting technology within the district? And making sure that we're creating an equal opportunity for everybody throughout the district. And the third one is maintaining and protecting the community's investment in facilities while improving operational efficiency. So ultimately, the district has invested a lot of monies to the facilities and has been working to maintain them over time, and we want to continue that process. And so we've been challenged on some of the solutions that we've been presented, and we've challenged the district back and forth to be able to find that best operational operational efficiency while maintaining those investments. And so what does this look like as we think about those guiding principles into actual projects? And so this is, again, where we balance between those immediate priorities, those long-term priorities, as we think about a facilities master plan that goes across a 10 or 15-year period. As we start off, what we have heard from this committee is some of those immediate priorities become Waco High School, addressing the middle schools at Carver, Indian Springs, and Tennyson, addressing the elementary schools at South Waco, Kendrick, and Alta Vista, but also looking at some district-wide goals, capital improvement projects aligned with the facility condition assessment that ultimately, as we take those 3 guiding principles and we start to implement it, that we can look at an immediate priority. And then from a long-term priority is really the continued development of those best opportunities for the students from pre-K through higher education, includes programs like CTE, those things. And then as well, the goal kind of at the elementary school level, but there will be continued needs identified across that 10 or 15-year period that are really going to create new inflections as the master plan continues to live out here moving forward in the future. And so these 2 slides are really important. We can flip between the 2 of them as needed, but ultimately what we're looking at is to many of the comments tonight of what are the guiding principles, making sure that this is setting correctly of 1, 2, and 3 to be able to create that foundation. And then what are the projects, including the immediate priorities. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions, because the next step is we are planning to move into a breakout group. And we want to talk about these to make sure that they align and what are the great things, if they align, what are the challenges, because ultimately this will help us move forward to wrapping up the facility master plan process.
Just one thing I would say is I think with the demographic presentation, which was fascinating, and I'm really grateful that we had that. I didn't feel like there was enough of a so what conversation. Like we got a lot of data, and I think the so what was implied, and this is not to fault the demographer who did an incredible job or anybody who put together this presentation, but I'm sort of thinking, okay, like, so what's the big story here? And it seems like the big story is that things are incredibly competitive in the market for education in the Waco McLennan MSA, that there are more and more charter schools, there are more private schools, there are niche boutique private schools popping up. There's, I mean, there were some charter schools in there that I haven't even heard of. And we have ISDs around us with better facilities and things and that are growing and improving. And our campus is, I mean, a school that was built in 1910 that had some improvements in the 90s, a school that was built in 89 and just got flooded. And I mean, I just, I think to me, there were two big takeaways from the demographer's presentation. One, that we're not seeing huge growth in Waco ISD. If anything, we're seeing sort of a dip, a plateau, maybe some moderate increases over the next 10 years, but we're not seeing explosive growth. The other thing I saw just is again, this thing about the competitive landscape for students. And if we don't have facilities that are attractive, both for teachers and for students, and that do all the things, the priorities here, that academic excellence, equity, you know, there's conversations about mental health for teachers and students now, especially, you know, pre-COVID, it was a big deal. Now it's an even bigger deal. And to say that you're coming to a classroom with like lime green walls and teachers have to use bathrooms that sort of degrade their humanity, that the library is not a well-lit space, or you have classrooms with no natural light. I mean, I think if you want to talk about mental health, you want to talk about attracting students, you want to talk about equity, having a campus that does that is so important. So I mean, for me, that was the big takeaway. That was the so what of all the demographics. This seems just really urgent.
Thank you for that, Aaron. I think the statewide numbers reflect that increase in competition, education, and I think the quality of our facilities makes such a huge difference for not only the students and the educational environment, but also for our teachers. And teachers do want to work in a nice facility, in a place that they're comfortable, and it does enhance and kind of raise the level of education for everyone. So I appreciate your comments.
And I think very much as you look at, you know, even that goal number one, that is talking about student pride and attraction, you know, competing in the marketplace, all the way to the educational facilities we support. So if everybody feels comfortable with the intent of these goals and where they're headed, as well as the master plan, if you'll go 2 slides, yep, we're going to switch over to breakout groups. So we're going to switch over to 4 groups, as we have done before. We're going to have 20 minutes to discuss, and what we're asking for is ultimately how well do these guiding principles align with your expectations and support for the long-term vision of the district. Basically, if we follow these goals, if we follow these priorities that are identified, does that create the Waco ISD of your future that you're visualizing? And so we'll moderate within this process, have discussion here for about 20 minutes, come back, report out to the group, and we will again ask everybody to vote to show how well they support. Again, the 1 being 1 highly support, and then 5 being you don't support these goals and priorities that we've identified based on the information today.
So Jared, to clarify, are we soliciting potential projects or just focusing on the goals?
How well do the goals align with priorities? All right. So we will jump in and see just overall open to the comments and questions that y'all have about the goals and initial thoughts, and we can kind of go goal by goal as well.
Sounds good, man.
You want to jump in, Keith? Your initial thoughts?
Oh, no, I was just saying it sounds good what you just said. Hey, my thoughts are the goals and priorities are in long-term goals. They all look good. I don't see how anyone can really disagree with what's said. I think just in the short term, the ask of the community as a whole will be another thing. But no one can disagree that we need these facilities and the strategies and the priorities that y'all put forward. We can agree with that. a poor interpreter. She's trying to interpret.
All right, what other thoughts do you have about overall? And so goal number one, it's kind of hit.
I think we need those facilities, but I also see a need at a few other schools that need a few things as well. Like Providence Heights, for example. Providence Heights, they need
Laquan. Jerry, are you the moderator? And are you able to mute Laquan?
I did. I can mute him. Well, it's not letting me mute.
We'll try and go ahead independent of that. So goal number one here was creating facilities throughout Waco ISD in support of the vision academic excellence. Ultimately, how does everybody feel about that one? Getting the thumbs up on that one.
Jared, sorry, Jared. I was just gonna say, yeah, I agree completely. When you see some of the facilities that y'all have shown, just with the multi-use space and the different ways bringing technology into the classroom, I think what y'all are showing aligns perfectly with that.
I don't know if this is nitpicking or this is the type of discussion we're supposed to be having. Are these goals truly, I hope y'all can't hear all the screaming, 1, 2, 3, top priority down, because I'm not certain why equity is then the second tier of that. I feel like that's one of the main things that we have been talking about and prioritizing and wanting students at all Waco ISD campuses to have an equal experience in the quality of the facilities that they're able to access.
They're not intended to be, I'll say, priority number one, priority number two, priority number three. I would say that they're all equal. And ultimately, as you move forward, you would have to weigh between those. But I will make note that goal number two should be goal number one.
Or, I mean, it seems like goal number two is really part of goal number one, that I think that our vision for academic excellence includes equity. To me, equity is a piece of that academic excellence. I'm not totally sure I see the distinction between the two of those. Again, I think I'm just nitpicking for the sake of us having discussion here.
Yeah, and I think a little bit, and I'm looking at the goals here off to the side. They're probably phrased from an architect in that perspective of one of creation of facilities is potentially about new facilities or addressing that. And then the second one is equity, is not only do you have to address any new facilities that would come into like Waco High School if there's a replacement that happens there, but you also have to come back and look at campuses like university and how are we supporting both in between the two. So not only equity amongst campuses, it's equity amongst students as well. So just a different lens, but yes, very related. All right, and then the third goal is maintain and protect the community's investment in facilities while improving operational efficiency. So that one really focuses about protecting the current investment, but also looking at operational efficiency. Thoughts or questions on that one, or in support of that one? Is that a thumbs up from everyone? Okay. And then in terms of priorities of the projects is, so as we look at those goals, I kind of look at those as being able to give us the lenses as well to be able to move forward, is when there are decisions to be made about priorities moving forward, about projects. What we've heard from this group ultimately had identified, I'll say, the Waco High School middle school replacement for Carver, Indian Springs, Tennyson, and then addressing the elementary schools, which would be augmenting South Waco, a replacement of Kendrick, and distributing the students from Alta Vista to the two campuses. And then as the district identifies other priorities, like portables, being able to support in fine arts, those type of elements, that would come under the district-wide goals and capital improvement projects. Is that the right initial priority of projects to be able to address? It's again, the question of highest and best need, or highest and most need.
That's the one I was most kind of torn on, is when you talk about closing, you're talking about closing Alta Vista. Is that correct? And I heard the gentleman earlier, can't recall his name, talking about just closing. When you close in the school, the next closest school I think is South Waco Elementary, and then you have it's Alta Vista, South Waco Elementary, and they're not really the demographics there and all of that, and then the distance between the two I don't like removing. I heard him talk about neighborhood schools. I guess I don't like removing neighborhood schools directly from a neighborhood, closing the school down, and then you're trying to combine two other schools into one. And like the families in Alta Vista that travel to that school, because it's a great school, and it's been one of our better elementary schools in our district, and trying to close it in that neighborhood, I can't just completely agree with that, I guess I'm saying. And I kind of struggle with that same reason that everyone didn't want to close Carver Middle School, and send all the kids to Carver over to Indian Springs, is because the travel for the parents and things like that, and what it means to that particular neighborhood. Alta Vista is a historical neighborhood in our city, and to close a school down right here inside I'm sitting in Alta Vista neighborhood right now. So that's what I'm looking at. So I look at the parents and the students who go into the school every day. And I understand the need to update or to even build a new Alta Vista if that was the case. I know we can't build every school new, but some schools are part of the neighborhood. And I look at Alta Vista Elementary being part of Alta Vista neighborhood.
But I think one of the points of that is that 205 of those kids at Alta Vista are on the other side of I-35 over by Kendrick. So for them, it's not really a neighborhood school.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got 201 kids left in that attendance area that is Alta Vista's neighborhood. But 200 kids, you can't really keep a school open for.
Yeah, I came in at the probably at the end of that conversation. So that information right there, that does make sense. But
yeah,
I came in at the end of the conversation.
But I'm sorry. I was part of the 2012 AJ Moore University consolidation. I was teaching at that time. And I had a son at AJ Moore and one at university. And the word consolidation was very scary. We were all against it. It was very scary. We didn't know. But let me tell you something. When we ended up, meaning the staff at AJ Moore ended up at university, it was awesome. It was amazing. The opportunities our students had, we would have never had if we would have stayed at AJ Moore. It's just the opportunities. Whenever you combine campuses, you're welcome to come to Kendrick. I'm the principal there at any time, and you can see our facilities and the opportunities our kids have, and then do a walkthrough to Bells Hills, and you will be amazed at the opportunities the kids have there. And I'm all for Bells Hills. It's a wonderful high performing campus. I live in the neighborhood. My kids all attended that school, but it's just the resources you have when you're able to combine schools. And it is scary. I was part of the A.J. Moore University High School consolidation, but the resources, our kids, even my personal children at that time, it was just, it was amazing.
Hey, Jared, you're welcome.
And I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Keith said. I don't know if y'all can hear me. I apologize. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Keith said because my kids did go down to Vista. I still have a daughter there. I went there. But I just feel like you said, it is scary consolidating and everything. But to me, I know that they were saying that there's like 450 lots that are pending to be built over there in the South Waco area. Is like, I know that they've taken that in consideration, but I just feel like if we divide everybody, those two new schools or renovated school and a new school for Kendrick, they're going to start to become overcrowded too. I don't know. I agree with Keith as far as the neighborhood schools to keep those. And as far as the opportunity, are we able to create that same opportunity in Alta Vista as well? But I don't know. I just kind of want to throw my 2 cents out there. It's just, I love Alta Vista. It's hard for me to see it close. I am going to be one of the ones that voiced my concern, even though I do understand the financial and analytical side of it. I just, but then also seeing those big numbers of all those big developments coming in the South Waco area kind of scares me as well. Like, because my daughter is still, she's only in 2nd grade, so she may be out of this when it comes to pass, but like my grandson's going to be coming in and it's like, so are they going to start to get to in 4 or 5 years, are we going to be having the same conversation, wishing that we would have kept Alta Vista open?
Yeah. And to Isabel's, I've been to both campuses. I've been to Kendrick and I've been to Bells Hills, and there is a big difference between the two schools. So I do understand that.
And I think, Misty, I think to your discussion, and that's really why we've tried to put all the information out there. And when you look at demographics, and for me, one of the takeaways I took from demographics in particular is the population, the enrollment within Waco ISD stays relatively flat. And that is considering the 500 lots that are in the South Waco zone. As you look at that over time, and it does remain relatively flat. So as we talk about planning schools and we talk about the population, this is kind of the question that Carrie asked, is we want to make sure that, we're not planning for 750 students and getting right to that edge. We want room for growth in all of them. And so that comes down to that minutia of, well, is it 800 students in each? How do we find that right balance to be able to support future opportunities that we never want to paint ourselves into a corner anywhere we go. And that's ultimately why we try and get everything in front of us and make those right decisions.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we did talk, we talked a little elementary school. Did you all have any thoughts about the priorities around middle school and high school?
I'm curious if this committee will decide, will we end up having to rank, we want high school as a top priority and then elementary schools, or are we just going to say all of these are of equal priority? Are we going to get that granular that we're deciding we want to do this elementary school, but this middle school, or is it all, or how much are we going to have to decide?
I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Angela.
Well, I think as much guidance as we can get, the better, right? I wanted to chuckle, Emily, because I'm thinking, oh, well, y'all could just tell us this all looks good. Good luck. Y'all figure it all out.
We've been talking about so much money. I mean, I think we said pretty definitively in the last meeting that we would not be able to pass a bond at once for the amount of money we've been talking about.
No, and the board did look at financial information from our advisor last meeting, I think. And he did break down how many pennies we are able to raise. And so what the board's going to have to grapple with is the number that we think our taxpayers will support when we look at how much we can raise per penny. I think and I'm going off my memory, but I think we can raise $150 million with no tax increase. Then with 6 cents of tax increase, I think 200, and so on. Right. So I think the committee could say, yeah, we can't decide. These are all of our priorities. We agree with them as presented. And then it'll be up to the board to look at, talk to our financial consultants, to Cheryl, and look at all the data that we've been given and decide how much we think our taxpayers will support. And,
I think we are planning on having the financial advisor here at the next meeting to show some of that.
Right. And that's why, Misty, to your point about, but what if all those homes come in and we make these decisions and then we have all these kids and we don't have any place to put them? That's what all this, that's why we have to have experts help us. And
Right,
so,
right.
yeah. And so the demographer's data, when you look at it, our trends are flat or trending down. And what he was saying is the district is, the trend is for public schools to lose kids to all of the competing forces. And I think we're definitely going to continue to lose even more if we don't do anything to address our facility needs, because we can't compete.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think as much guidance as the committee is able to give the board, so, we can just kind of have another, well, it's just hard. It's going to be hard. Nobody wants to give up a neighborhood school.
Right.
Nobody does. Not one member of the board doesn't believe in neighborhood schools. We all believe and love our neighborhood schools. I went to Parkdale, which was my neighborhood school, and I walked over there, and every single one of our schools has a history. Yeah. But we all want the best for our kids, all of our kids. When it goes back to equity, I was thinking about equity, Emily, in that the way, one thing is, as we look at how we spend our capital funds to make capital improvements, equity. So for example, and I think Jared, you touched on this, but when you talk about our high schools, were we to replace Waco High School, we will want to make sure that whatever decisions we make with that new school, we don't leave university behind in something, but make sure that we maintain equity between programs so kids aren't disadvantaged depending on what school they go to. But gosh, when you look at University High School and the advantages our kids over there have over the kids at Waco High School, it's just, wow. Yeah.
Emily, we have 45 seconds. Did you want to add anything about priorities about middle school or high school before we leave? You're good. And I think to answer the question, we are looking at getting the financial advisor here next time to be able to discuss with preliminary values so we get a better sense of the dollars as we identify the priorities in this group. That's where we can come back and say your immediate priorities will be X and be able to help support us moving forward. Well, great. Well, I appreciate everybody in support, and we will see you in the main room.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica with O'Connell Robertson. I'll be moderating our group number 2. Believe we have everybody here. So the question that Jared kind of pushing forward is, do these goals, do they align with your expectation? And if not, what are some of the challenges that you possibly see with what we have discussed this evening? So with that, I will open it up.
So I think, can I talk for a minute? So I think facilities, since I'm from here and I know a lot of you are also, but facilities is one thing we really haven't looked at in the past. And I know people sometimes will leave, especially at Waco High, they'll leave and they'll say they're going to another school, and they'll say, you know, it's a new school too. It's a brand new building. So I know there's other points, but I just think the facilities is a big part of the environment. Like Erin said before, I mean, it's got to do with yourself, even for the teachers. You know, it would be nice to have a new campus. I mean, for the district, which way we're leaning towards.
I mean, I think Waco ISD's, many of our facilities, doing nothing is really not an option. Doing nothing means the facilities start to become really physically unsafe, to say nothing about hygiene and all that. But the Dean Saxenian could talk about the sort of moisture problems and leakage in Waco High and the risk of mold. And I mean, just if you didn't take the tours of all the middle and elementary schools, I mean, there's just a lot of issues. And so are we saying that the best strategy for Waco as we grow and as the educational market gets more competitive to do nothing for the next 50 years and then just wait till it's more expensive and we've sort of lost the game? So I think, to Jessica's question, what are some of the challenges? I think there's a burgeoning narrative in the community that, you know, the trustees have entered a smoke-filled room to decide to close schools, as opposed to a conversation about what's the highest, best long-term strategy to have a winning educational system in this city and county for decades to come. And some change is necessary, but overall, it's a win-win for us to have 21st century schools for our students that will encourage teacher retention, student education, morale across the district, a growing city. I mean, just like, to me, the positives are so huge and the negatives are short-term that come with change that, you know, I get that people don't like change. It's hard, but I mean, I feel like we've been through a pandemic, we survived that. I feel like we can survive some changes to our school system.
Especially positive changes. You know, one of the questions that Aaron raised in the chat room is, while we looked at some McLennan County numbers, there were no projections about students continuing to leave Waco ISD for charter schools or other schools. He just mentioned teacher retention. We really need to look at student retention as well. And there's no question that better facilities can help with that. But I think we do need to look at private schools, charter schools, and where they fit in, even though I think that's further down the list. It is a factor, but it is a numerical factor, not a quality factor.
And to the demographer's point that you have district enrollment that's shrinking. I mean, let's look at the flip side. If we were in a growing district, we'd be talking about building schools. We're in a shrinking district, so it seems logical that we're talking about how can we consolidate and make the best use of the schools and the areas that we have. We're not talking about adding real estate necessarily, especially if we're looking at the existing South Waco and just kind of building where we have the land and the real estate.
I wish I'd have written down the numbers or taken screenshots, but when did the years, was it elementary or middle, when most people were transferring out? I'd also be very curious, as I have a senior, when the ones that transferred into Waco High started coming in. It seems it's later in their career that they come back from people he'd been to elementary school with and things like that. So I'm assuming there's a lot of departure at the middle school level. Yes. So with that, I mean, we just got out of elementary school. So I have kids very spread apart. So I see the needs on lots of levels. I don't see how anyone couldn't think these are needs we need to address. But if the concern is about student retention, I think that you have to prioritize, like we have done in that where our first slide was, with the high school and middle school levels. Not to discount elementary, it's just for whatever reason, we stick around in elementary. I don't know if it's with athletics, and I know that Coach Love is working his tail off to make athletics a priority in middle school. And if we have the facilities to compete, I mean, I'm just hearing this from my son at the middle school and high school levels, what a difference that makes. So I just would be more curious to know. I get that they transfer in or out at these times, but especially when in middle school do they transfer out, and when in high school do they come back in, and things like that. But important. I can't imagine someone not thinking this isn't a priority, but I also agree with like what Kay Paul said and what Aaron said as well, that change is hard, but when it's positive change, and if you're encouraging people to stay in the city of Waco and not move out, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for our city.
We also have Mr. Carpenter in our group, and fine arts is an issue. And, we've got university that competed at state. You look at the Waco High facility, certainly the PAC is there, but I think their band hall facilities are not quite as good as university. And you talk about equity and how do we build on that? We can, there's instead of one, maybe.
I'll agree to that.
I will as well, Coach Stewart.
Gretchen, oddly enough, a number of kids leave for various reasons, but one of the reasons that kids come back in high school is curriculars. And also, I know Vanguard does not rank its students, which makes it difficult for them to get top 10 scholarships. I'm trying to remember if Riker does or not, but those kids can come back and get rankings in high school to help them get into college.
I think the point too about the extracurricular at all levels, honestly, the strength of our arts programs, the strength of our sports programs, continuity between them, elementary to middle to high school, the fact that those are threads in the district, to me, those are the kinds of are built for that strengthen retention, students, parents, the community. And that, I think one of the early was looking specifically at any renovations or reconstructions that we create. I just, it's not captured in the demographics, but I think it is captured in quality of education. And I do think it's something that schools have over charter schools in spades. And I think we ought to use our assets and maximize them.
I'm going to call some people out. I want to make sure we hear from everybody here. Stephanie, do you have anything as far as, do you feel like we're aligning with these goals? Do you see any potential challenges? What are your...
Been pretty quiet. I struggle. Folks are feeling that this could be a negative thing, separate and apart from the one thing I recognize to Mountain View Elementary. If you all were proposing to me that we were going to demolish Mountain View and build a whole new school, or just do away with it all, attachment and challenge with that. So that's what's going on in my brain. Is I know we're talking about doing away with one or more, exactly which ones. Other than that, I can't come up with in my mind where any might have a negative feeling towards these changes. And so I guess if those have been explicitly stated, anybody has those, share those.
I think the only drawback was Carver, and that's because of the historical connection that it has, dating all the way back to desegregation. So I think, I think that was the only thing that was an issue with some people in the initially when it was presented. If it's going to be a new school, I don't know. I don't know I think there's still mixed feelings just because there are so many people here that actually walked the halls at the school. But if they knew what was going on, rain and water and everything else that is associated with it, I think everything just has to be presented with the facts of how much maintenance it actually costs. And so I think that was the only thing, one thing that was taken away from I guess the new of Indian Spring and Carver. I think those students at Indian Spring, if anybody knew anything before that, Brazos Middle was over there where Riker is, and so they've already kind of gone through the process of putting everything in Indian Spring. So I don't think Indian Spring has that much, not that they don't have the ties, but it's not as much as Carver because of like I said, because dating all the way back to the 60s. And I can only speak to that because my mom and my dad graduated from Carver. I have that connection. So.
And I do, just one more quick thing, I have such a love for history. Really bothers me that we have a culture of tearing down and building new. I mean, that is in a sense the American way, but when you walk, it's indisputable. I mean, it needs to be rebuilt. So.
I think whenever this is presented and how it is, and I know there's some nuance around how it can be presented to the community for vote if it becomes a bond, and I don't know all the legality of that, but that it is addressed to the community that it's not changed just for change's sake. It's change for these reasons. Like it has to be presented in a way that won't create negativity in certain areas. I think other parts, it's just a no-brainer. And yeah, we need it. If you've ever walked the halls of Waco High, you kind of, but I think in other ways, like you're talking about from a historical perspective, I mean, I have a minor in history, so I'm right there with you. You have to present it. It has to be told what's going on, not just, oh, we're making this decision to make this decision and it's a numbers game. If it's more than a numbers game, I think people will understand.
And to say that, the goal of desegregation was to provide equity in education, but to say that Carver has to remain a substandard facility, I mean, talk about preserving inequity. That seems to go exactly against what desegregation was trying to accomplish. And so, I drove a 92 Volvo in high school, and I loved it. I had some sentimental attachments to it, but I'm sure glad I'm not driving it now.
But isn't the real issue that it would close a school on the other side of the river and there would be no
No. They'd build a 21st century new Carver. This is where the communication is so important. Brand new Carver in East Waco, the best middle school in Waco, repurpose Indian Spring to be administrative offices. And so there is no removing of Carver ever. Not happening.
That's correct. So I don't know if that was ever discussed. The administration building, are they going to sell the old building, or I don't know if that's part of all of this plan here, or
at this time it's pretty high level of what's happening, which is just consolidating the Indian Springs and the Carver right now.
Okay.
Placement of that, and
okay.
I think that stuff is to come. So Lindsay, I see you have your hand raised. Definitely want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. As principal of Alta Vista Elementary, the elementary school that's being proposed to be shut down, I will have to say this conversation is very challenging to listen to. I just want to point out a couple things. Alta Vista has a very special community. I don't know if y'all noticed on the demographic numbers, but we actually attract more than 10% of our school population does not live in our attendance zone. People are frequently doing transfer requests to come to Alta Vista. And of that 57 that come to Alta Vista that don't live in our attendance zone, 17 of those students actually live outside of Waco ISD's school zone. So these are students that could be going to Midway, China Springs, Robinson, Lorena, and they're actually choosing to go to a Waco ISD school, which is Alta Vista Elementary. So it's very hard to hear these conversations. I know that from a facilities and a financial perspective, they make sense. But from a community perspective, we're missing the boat on this.
Whereabout are you located at Alta Vista?
We are right down the street from University High School off New Road.
Okay. Now,
Lindsay, oh, go ahead, K. Paul.
What's the school over in the 05?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Go ahead.
Are you referring to a zip code, K. Paul?
Yeah.
I don't know the zip codes. You're a contractor. You know the zip codes in Waco. I think you're the only person on this call that does.
Isn't Hines in 04?
Yes.
Is that the one? Because 05 gets to Belmead and Lacey.
But I was thinking there was
He's
something
referring
over-
to Hines.
No, not Hines. I was thinking there was one further over there. I know where Hines is. I was on the Y board for a long time. It's right there. And I may be thinking of the wrong school.
Lindsay, I don't want to put you on the spot. I know we've only got a minute and a half left, but I think you might be alluding to what I'm trying to figure out. Like, what am I missing? I know there is more here. I know there's more to the story as to why we wouldn't want to make these changes. And that's what I'm trying to figure out in my brain. And I just don't have them.
I mean, for one, transportation's a concern. I'm sorry, I had to pop in and out. This is Hope, because I've got my kids alone here and running around. But yeah, I think also with transportation, if we close the school down, that means who knows how many parents in that neighborhood who walk to school or who co-ride to school or whatever. Like, it just making it less accessible to parents and families is never a good thing for me. And I know a lot of people in the community have that same sentiment, that it just, if a kid misses a bus and then their parent has to drive them across town or further, that might not happen, and they might be truant more often. And that brings a whole nother host of issues. And then they can't get to PTA meetings, or they can't engage. And we know parent engagement is huge in student success. So I think there's a lot around transportation.
But isn't it true that Indian Spring has like almost no residential people that are walking to
Yeah,
school?
I was thinking about Alta Vista.
Okay. And I'd love to hear, I don't know how much time we have, but to hear from Ms. Helton about Alta Vista. What is the community? Is it just a long-term generational attachment to the school? Is it just a close-knit community? It's
a very close-knit community. Our teachers we have very low staff turnover. We have some of the lowest staff turnover in the district. And our teachers enjoy being at Alta Vista. They enjoy teaching. And so our kids enjoy coming to school, and that makes parents happy to send their kids to school. I mean, that's why over 50 kids are coming to Alta Vista that don't have to attend Alta Vista. They could be choosing other schools to go to.
And what's your sense of what drives that community?
I can't tell you exactly what it is. I've been there for 6 years, but it's always been a tight-knit community before I even started there. I think it's just been several years of really good leadership, previous to me, and then, trying to maintain that community.
Thank you, everybody. Great conversation and a common.
Be losing middle school kids to surrounding districts. And a lot has to do with facilities. So that is huge on my goals right now, as far as making those changes that need to be made in order to keep our kids in our district.
Other thoughts on the guiding principles before we shift
Let me
priorities?
address that comment about prioritizing elementary and middle school. My sense is, and I've had two children go through from elementary to middle to high school. I think a lot of the decision processes that families go through are aiming toward that high school experience. All the deliveries that we can do at the high school level, whether it be athletics, whether it be fine arts, even going into Enrollment Rock as far as career and technology education. So I think that from a family standpoint, a lot of families will target what they see at the high school level and then kind of ratchet back their decisions from there to look at options, look at alternatives. I see priorities. My feeling is I see, based on inputs I'm hearing, I see priorities across the district that needs to be addressed. But the target where it all comes together with these different diverse populations, which is the key for success, I think, in any high school, is to see all those students come together, yes, with successful experiences in learning environments at the middle school and elementary level, but culminating in high school to as a capstone piece, if you will. So I don't know if that helps, but I really think that, you know, early on in this process, I think the community group was very enthusiastic about isolating, looking in detail at Waco High School. A lot of discussion took place there. So to the extent that you, I guess, feel that that was a good direction initially, my feeling it does, you know, as far as the high school goes, and Waco High specifically, I think it matches up, you know, very well to the priorities that we've discussed and talked about that Kyle just reiterated, the guiding principles.
This is Johnny. I'm having computer problems, but I guess you can hear me. I don't see it so much as an either or, but I do think the high school age students are probably more cognizant of facilities than even the younger ones. So, I mean, I really hate to think of it as an either or, but I think the high school priority is critical because they're becoming adults. They're more aware of what they have and those kind of things.
I have two high schoolers and a middle schooler, and you know, I have to say the conversation about are we going to keep our kids in Waco ISD? We have a junior and a freshman, but are we going to keep them here for our youngest? Like that's on the table because I don't know, the high school is a constant challenge for us and it's really tiring. And the facilities are a problem. There is water in light fixtures when it rains. There's mildew smell. And I've got a kid that is very allergic to mold. And I mean, we're looking at our daughter wants to apply to Ivy League. Well, we're a little bit concerned about the profile of the high school. We have to submit a profile. And I think, I mean, I don't know, like it's really important. Where a kid graduates from is really important. And if we're looking at if we're trying to be forward thinking here in Waco ISD, I think we really do have to focus on the high school because the tone of the high school sets the tone for the whole district. I think we covered that early on, or we talked about that early on, but it's really important what we do at the high school level, and the middle school feeding into it has to prepare their kids for the high school. So it's not like they're not related. Ideally, they would be working together to build their programs and team them.
Can I I'd like to add some frame, and I'll start with Mr. Jones's question or comments earlier, which is additional efforts, right? Well, those additional efforts are inherently wrapped and have been presented within this process over the last few months. Ms. Kornblum and her team, which is our assistant superintendent for academics, and it goes to something that Zimmerman said as well, which is having the adequate facilities to be able to accomplish the work that we need to accomplish with our kids in the current environment as well as the future, right? So when we start talking about 21st century learning, it really is about preparing our kids for the greatest potential, achievement of success. And so sometimes, I guess, at some degree, it is how we determine and define success. It's certainly far more than just the type of accountability ratings or test scores that we would like to accomplish. It is about preparing students for success into adulthood and usefulness and service to not only this community, but the communities in which they will live and serve later on in life. Whether it be an Ivy League school or whether it be the best community college, our kids deserve our best option, our very best effort to help them be prepared in doing so. And that's in every way. And then we get to perception of the facilities, perception of the district as a whole. And that does have an impact on teachers. Ms. Zimmerman, not only is she an employee of the district, she is a parent of the district. And so I know that while my family resides in Houston, the decisions we've made on where we live have the schools and the quality of the school district had a huge impact on where we chose to live. And I think that's pretty much the same for everyone, right? So I think it is certainly no way to simplify. Like, this is so multifaceted. And it goes right back to what Mr. Sykes says. The high school is the flagship, if you will, to the district. But to Ms. Zimmerman's point, every level that leads to the high school, elementary schools are preparing students to be able to succeed in middle school. And in middle school, our responsibility is to ensure that students are prepared to go into high school and beyond and be successful. And I always say this all the time, there's no reward for grade 8 grades. But kids that can go into 9th grade fully prepared to be successful, and then have the high school staff take them beyond and finish off their preparation. So it's a continuation of service. And in many of our schools, and I can only speak for Carter specifically, there's the only school I've been in, we're not prepared according to today's standards to be able to do that from just an instruction standpoint. Now, we can also talk about just the extreme need, and if you've ever been in Carter, I don't think they say anything more. That's going to be addressed in these long-term facilities plan. I think there's some short-term work going on as well. But I think that we would be, missing the mark if we try to put this in a simple box, because it doesn't fit. There are just too many things that have to be considered in this effort. I'll start my comments now for your 15 seconds before I provide. But I would just encourage everyone to have a more longitudinal mindset as we think about this very important decision that has to be made.
So as we close, is there something that you're missing that either you see missing in the guiding principles or the priorities, or is there something that you're missing as you think about facilities that you're looking for and want to make sure gets captured in the next meeting?
Is there anything within the guiding principles that speaks to data driven decision making?
So I think certainly there's a big push across the district for data-driven instruction, and that, along with action coaching, is embedded in all of the professional development and the curriculum and instruction work that's happening. But I think that's a little different than.
So, I'm asking that question because I think it should also apply to the long-range facilities. My children go to J.A. Times, which I think was rebuilt in 2012, and it has an F rating. The facilities did not necessarily.
Oh, there is Bob. I didn't see you, Bob. There were a couple of questions in the chat box. I thought you had dropped off. Are you there?
Yes, still here.
Okay. There was a question in the chat box about just Waco ISD and the growth, and whether the lack of growth was competition or something else. Is that a good?
Well, there is definitely the increase. You know, there has been competition from the charter schools and even from surrounding school districts that are now, you know, more and more surrounding districts are opening up transfer allowances from out of the district, not just for employees, kids, but from, you know, anybody. So we are seeing increase in competition from charter schools and from the surrounding school districts.
Okay, great. So I think, Jenna, you're our facilitator. You want to get us started?
That's actually Casey. Hey,
Casey.
yes, I'm here. It's okay. Well, Jenna can help me. Jenna can chime in too, but the question we've been tasked with, and by facilitator, I'm just the one reading the question and potentially answering some questions for you, but I'd prefer you guys sort of chat amongst yourselves. But essentially the question we're being asked to consider is how well do the guiding principles and the priorities align with your expectations of support of the long-term vision for Waco ISD? And those were the most recent items we went over, the guiding principles, you know, create facilities throughout the district that support the vision for academic excellence. It's ensure equity across the campuses. I'm very briefly paraphrasing here, and also maintain and protect the investment in facilities while also improving the operational efficiency. So I can go into more detail if there's questions, but I'd rather you guys kind of talk amongst yourselves. And
this is Dr. Henry again. I think that in terms of those goals or priorities that you just mentioned that I feel been very clear about, what I think I would like to do is to take a moment to review these quote unquote immediate priorities, because it's been a while since we talked about them. So help me if I'm correct or incorrect. So with Waco High, what we have said is that have we said that we'd like to replace that, but almost working on that particular site? Is that what we came to?
Yes, ma'am. In the Waco High School meeting, well, it was meeting 4. We started out with a few more options, and it was ultimately directed by this group that the desire is to rebuild on the existing site, because again, the district had already taken over or is in the process of taking over Lake Air Montessori, not Lake Air Montessori, I'm so sorry, Lake Air Fields.
Yeah, the baseball
so
fields.
we would have the available space on site to do so.
Okay, and then with the middle schools, what have we decided? Have we decided a complete replacement for Carver and Indian Springs, or was it a combination?
And so the direction, the majority of the group selected to combine Carver and Indian Spring on the Carver campus. So we would build a new building on the Carver campus that would take in the Indian Spring and Carver populations. Okay. And we would build a new school on the Tennyson campus to support the Tennyson students.
Okay, that's clear. And now we've only recently with the elementaries, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I didn't get a clear sense that we had made a decision about the elementaries.
And that one's a little bit trickier because the high school and the middle school are very definitive, targeted. This is what we're doing on this campus. There are significantly more elementary schools and significantly more need. And so on that, what this group has really been reviewing is big picture principles. You know, we want to essentially clean up all the campuses that have the moderate to most advanced need in terms of aging facilities and not flexible enough for modern teaching pedagogies and
those schools with the most need were the ones we talked about today.
Yes, and so, you know, essentially the long-term goal over many bonds would be to fix many or all of the elementary schools.
Right.
But the most immediate priority would be the Alta Vista, South Waco, and Kendrick replacements.
And those were,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, those were the schools that were lowest ranked on our educational suitability and facilities condition assessment. So you'll remember those graphs that the architect showed and where they drew that line on those lower ranked elementary schools. Those were in that cluster in South Waco. So that's what those were.
I didn't come away, and maybe other people did, and this will be the last thing that I'll say. I only came away from the last meeting with the understanding that these were the 3 schools that were in most need, but I came away thinking that there was a great deal of indecision about what to do with the 3 schools. And so I just need to know, did I miss that, or have we not made a decision about those 3? I mean, I think people were talking about Alta Vista. They were concerned about it and what it would mean to replace it or do whatever we wanted to do. But so have we made any decisions about that? I'm just trying to clarify for myself.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to get to tonight.
Perfect. Okay. I understand now. Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Good question, Commissioners. Thank you for that. I have a question on the slide about immediate priorities. There's a bullet that says district-wide goals. Can somebody clarify what those are when it comes to facilities beyond the what we've already talked about, the priority, the guiding principles and things like that? What are the district-wide goals?
And so those were introduced very early on in the process, and we've been sort of working behind the scenes to sort of clarify that. That came up, one good example is technology goals across the district. Okay. So for example, Jerry Allen worked with principals and educators about what the goals were. So they've got an implementation plan for the technology. And so those are things that touch all campuses over time. And it's not as simple as this campus gets this. And
okay, thank you.
And I want to add, just from my experience, having done facilities work for a long time, it takes years to do this kind of work. Probably never ends, to be honest. And so when you start talking about the number of elementary schools that we have, you have to decide where to start to do the work, and then you have to keep revisiting it. So if we were to have this bond election this fall and then and take on these projects, then we would come back as these projects are finishing and think about the next round of projects. So you would likely see another bond election here in a few years to keep the work going, and maybe even sooner for your elementary schools. My experience in Belton was that we were tackling elementary schools every 2 years. Now, mind you, we were growing, and middle schools every few years, and then high schools obviously are longer. But this is an ongoing process, or should be, right? The work shouldn't end if you're constantly trying to maintain and update your facilities.
Susan, I have a question around that. We're talking about a master plan that, if fully implemented, would be implemented over the course of multiple years. In your experience, and Casey, you maybe can answer this as well. In your experience, is it more appropriate to roll out little pieces at a time, or is it more appropriate to say to our voting public, here's the master plan, this is the component we're working on right now? Or is that, I'm trying to think what's going to be the best use of getting our voting public to buy into this, because I think my sense is our Achilles heel is our demographics. The numbers are dropping, and I can see voters, especially our elderly voters who are on fixed incomes and so on and so forth, saying, well, if our numbers are dropping, why do we need new buildings? And I don't know if it's better to give them the big picture and then say, but we're only going to work on this part right now, or is it better to just talk about the little parts and then roll out, surprise, here's the next one, and then surprise, here's the next one every 3 or 4 years. What's your experience?
Well, my experience, of course, you know, again, I'm coming from fast growth district.
Yeah.
My experience has been to develop this kind of a 10 to 15 year plan, and you roll it out in pieces because you can't afford to do it all at once anyway. This is a very aggressive plan that we've come up with, and we still have to talk about whether or not we're going to be able to do all of this, and in one fell swoop or in phases. And so I think, what's important is that you're using data to support your decisions, and that those guiding principles are really key, right? This is what we're striving for our kids in our community. And here's how we're going to get there. And I don't think you have to figure out all of the elementary pieces all at one time, because that's going to take years to happen, and you're going to have different boards and members and different community people that are involved along the way. And so I think you plan for the foreseeable future while you're looking out with those projections. And so a unique challenge here is the condition of our facilities, and trying to catch up a bit.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kincan is referencing the physical conditions of our facilities. Besides just some older facilities, unfortunately, a lot of them are not set up to facilitate the great teaching that is occurring in there. And so you're having teachers work around some physical limitations.
So I think in terms of promoting or talking about the bond program, in my case, because I wouldn't be promoting it as the superintendent once it's called, but I would just talk about facts and talk about the guiding principles and what the vision is. And then I think, for those that you can go a little bit further as a community member or as an advisory committee member. But I think sticking to what we said those guiding principles are is really important. And that's it, right? We're trying to improve the quality of our instructional spaces for our kids. And that's the story here. We're not trying to manage growth or to get something just to get it. It really is to improve.
I think these 3 schools, they have to be fixed. Like they're not optional. So it makes sense to get those approved first as we're moving on. And because regardless of if we grow or if we don't, if we go back 100% or hybrid, those facilities need to do that. And that's going to help us get different teachers, I think, for those 3 elementary schools. But I understand Dr. Henry, why she was confused. It was confusing because we're going back meetings. I was just looking at, we're going back a lot of meetings and talking about some of the things today, so they were a little bit unclear.
Yes, definitely. And I see a comment in the chat from Mrs. Henry asking, in what order do we work? Sort of how are we defining which projects are happening first? And what that ties into what Mrs. Clayton was just asking is our next meeting, we're going to do a recap of everything we've done so far, outline, not everything, just, here were the key decisions, kind of like we did at the beginning of this session. And ultimately, that's what goes into the facilities master plan. This group is defined. This is our vision. These are our guiding principles. This is big picture concept, what we think needs to be done. This is the more immediate side. This is longer term vision. And ultimately, it's going to be up to Waco ISD senior leadership when they talk about bonding capacity, which we're going to hear about in the next meeting, and available funds. They'll put together a couple different options to talk about. There's different ways to skin a cat. So I think it's going to be a combination of those with the biggest need and those with the biggest support.
Well, I think Peach's question is the hardest question, right? Where to start if you have to prioritize your funding. So that's why the demographic or the bond debt capacity presentation at our next meeting is really critical. We are waiting to get our preliminary tax values. Actually, those may have come in. They were due, I think, May 1st. Haven't seen them yet. But we'll we'll be looking at our, our options in terms of financing new schools. And then the board will have to wrestle with how much. And I think our architects have a question for you all next time about what do you think the community support. And so it does come down to the dollars and what do we think our taxpayers are willing to support in the first bond program.
Susan, would you refresh my memory? There's, I guess, recent legislation, the voters are somehow allowed to basically a line item veto where they can pull, I guess, is that just for non-educational facilities, or how many different things or types of project? I mean, can they ixnay an entire elementary school but vote to build a high school at bond election time?
No, there's some new, in the last legislative session, there were new requirements regarding additional facilities like athletic facilities or fine art facilities. And basically you were adding like the Paul Tyson Stadium, if we were to have asked for a bond.
Right.
To do that on a ballot with another facility, we would have had to have made that unless it was part of a brand new build, we would have had to have made it a separate.
It has to pass on its own, in other words. Okay.
And
But
then
the rest of the stuff is not going to be divisible. It's all going to be our elementary schools, our high school, and middle schools, depending, of course, what we end up having the debt capacity for.
Correct.
You know,
And we've already met with our bond council
I
to
suspect we'll have,
say it again, Carrie. Say that last part again.
I suspect we'll be trimming.
Yeah.
I suspect we'll be trimming some things. Sorry.
That's why I think.
Unfortunately. Okay.
That's why I think Peach's question is really smart, because do you stop? Where do you start? Do you tackle your secondary schools first, or your elementary, or do you do some of both?
I bet we don't all agree.
I bet we don't all agree.
Which goes to Peach's second point. There's also the politics with the small p. Everybody's going to want their neighborhood school, their children's feeder schools to get it. That's where the data is going to be so important. That if we choose to support whatever comes out of this group, that's where I feel like we need to be really conversant in, because that will minimize the local politics of that issue. It won't do away with it. I mean, Peaches is absolutely right, but it will minimize. But when you point out those facts, it's hard not to just be shocked and embarrassed that we have schools in this district that are in the conditions they're in, even though my children or grandchildren don't go to those schools.
Hey, Dr. Kincannon, this is Jenna. I just wanted to share something really quick. Just the question you had, Ms. Olson, about, do you do everything all at once, or do you do it phased? I do want to share with you guys that once your community sees the efforts you're making in improving your facilities, it will get them really excited and generate enthusiasm and, in a sense, of momentum for your improvements. So to all your points, picking the right facilities and right strategic plan and improvements is key, such as eliminating your portables. I mean, that's going to be a big thing, right? So having done those key improvements, it will encourage your community to support what you're doing. And you guys' voice is really, really instrumental in, in what's going to happen in this district. So it's just great to hear everyone's enthusiasm and interest and what do we do. So that's great.
We just have a few more seconds before we get pulled out. I took some good notes. Thank you all for your input. If you think of anything else moving forward, let one of us know and we'll follow up, but I'll be summarizing it back out to the group when we return. We'll find this out. Here we got another 60-minute warning. Look at that. We have 60 minutes to get out of here. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Well, we had some great discussions, and I figure we'll report out here before we go to take the vote and kind of see the support. So I was in group number one, and overall, everyone agreed that the three goals aligned with the priority needs. There was some discussion about, where those goals in rank order, I'll say, and know that they are not intended to be in rank order. There was a discussion about whether or not number two, where it was about equity, really what should be goal number one within that framework. But ultimately, we know that the three really work together, so equity can't happen without the facilities and focus across all campuses. Then as we talked about the priorities between the immediate and the long-term priorities, ultimately there was still some expressed concern about the closure around Alta Vista and just what that means for the campus, but we also talked about the demographics and where students are actually at. And there was an individual who also shared their experience with the closure of A.J. Moore and University High School from the previous bond, about the opportunity as you look at those facilities that it really creates for the students and the teachers that they wouldn't have had if they had remained as two separate campuses. So overall, our group number one was supportive of it. The last question that kind of came up at the end, and ultimately this will lead to the next meeting as well, is ultimately, can we afford it? And so we talked about how right now we're trying to identify the goals and identify those immediate priorities so we can start identifying, in essence, projects and cost. And then ultimately next meeting, we'll be looking at the financial capacity of the district. So that'll help us weigh those two elements together. So that was kind of where we ended the conversation for group number one. So group number two, I just see Kyle on the screen, so I'm going to pick him and imagine that he's group number two.
I think we were group number three, but we're happy to go second tonight. Thanks, Jared. I think that there was a lot of consensus that the guiding principles point us in the right direction. But what I think Marlon Jones really effectively reminded us of is that it's not going to be facilities alone. And there was a lot of discussion about how the experience that our students have and the things that create student success are really multifaceted. And facilities play into that, but are not in and of themselves the only tool that we have in the toolbox or the only answer to our questions. We did talk in terms of priorities about kind of a push and pull of the significance of the high school and the significance of elementary and middle school facilities. I think it was really sort of clearly stated by some folks the way the high school serves as a capstone on students' experiences and is something that students look to and families look to, and that it casts a perception to some extent of the district as a whole. While at the same time, we have this pattern where, especially later elementary years into middle school years, we start to lose students and then may gain some of them back in high school. So it's really significant to think about those elementary and middle school facilities in terms of how we use those to help retain students and keep them in the district, along with all those other pieces that go into student success. So certainly, I think, Jared, our group ended in kind of a similar place, looking at the significance of all of the immediate priorities and questioning how to balance them against what the district might be able to afford.
Thank you, Kyle. So then we'll switch over to group three or group two that's acting as group three, maybe with Casey.
Nope. Wrong again. We were group four, but we'll go number three. I'm sorry, Jess, you're probably number two, but I'll go next. And so our group started off very similarly, it sounds, to the other groups, is we felt as a group very clear, much clearer about the goals and priorities, and thought general agreement, those sound good. We are less clear about the immediate projects. So we talked a little, to remind us, jog our memories, we talked a little about sort of those key elements. And so there's still a little lack of clarity or unsurety about the elementary schools. We talked a little bit about clarifying that. And then we segued over to sort of what's happening next, as we talked about how do we prioritize these projects? What's the order of these projects? And so we talked about that needing a convincing rationale to the district, because everyone's going to want their campus first, and how is that decided? And we indicated that that's next steps as we get into bond planning, and we'll be hearing more about that bonding capacity and next steps in the next meeting. And then we also talked briefly about, I thought it was well said, noted the Achilles heels is the declining demographic. Essentially we're going out and asking for new schools at the same time we've got declining numbers. Not in a huge way, but we think that's going to be a little challenging to communicate with the public. And so it was suggested that we, promote and talk about, we focus on the facts, the guiding principles, sort of the rationale, how we broke down, how we got to where we are. And so communicating those as clearly as possible, we think would help. So that's kind of where we tied off. And so I think next it would go over to Jessica's group.
That's right.
Yes. Well, really, our group really echoes a lot of the things that we've discussed already and that you've heard. But so I'll just kind of focus on really what the challenges were. And although there's a lot of positives that come from upgrading these facilities, doing some replacements as well, the challenge is going to be the emotional or the attachment that these communities have to some of these schools, and really how we communicate that to these communities, specifically the schools that we discussed being Alta Vista and Carver, and just their historical facts that they play within those communities. But again, everyone in our group kind of said the same things of, we understand the need for these improvements. We don't disagree, but we need to make sure that it's communicated and tell that whole story as to why we're looking at closing some of these schools. I will say, as far, one of the things I heard about the demographic report is, although there is a prediction of some decline in that, our group discussed how we feel that we're doing good and well with our discussion of working with what we have, consolidating and really just kind of working on that part. So really the only negative feeling that anybody talked about and where we ended was just those attachments to some of those facilities, and just addressing that to the community.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. And so I think as we come together, and I think this is ultimately what we're focused on. And Jessica, if you want to bring up the presentation again, we do want to make sure it's clear. Hopefully the question's clear this time, but ultimately we do want everybody to poll here on how well these guiding principles and priorities align with your expectations of support for the long-term vision of the district. Is ultimately over the next 10 or 15 year period that following these three items, the goals and priorities outlined, is going to end in that result. So we'll give everybody here a minute or so to be able to vote. So we're about halfway there. About 30 people have responded. Looks like we just have a couple more responses here.
Who writes these questions?
A couple people here at the firm. Are you looking for a job, Carrie?
I'm kind of struggling with some grammar or something, I think, maybe. Just, it's okay. I have a job. Thank you, Jared. It's not a good job, but I have a job.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of times we're architects and not English majors.
I understand.
There's a great Mark Twain quote that is, only the uncreative mind can think of one way to spell a word. I like to misspell it multiple times in the same sentence.
Is there some kind of sentence structure problem there, or am I just maybe not reading it right. Maybe we're missing punctuation that would help.
Some punctuation may help there to make it more clear. So.
Clarifying. Okay.
But we do appreciate everybody's
expectations of support. Yeah. Okay.
Do appreciate everybody focusing in here and being able to help voice their support of the goals and priorities. And I think this really leads to next time, and we kind of hinted that at that already. Jessica, if you want to advance here. So we have run through meeting number 7. And so next time we hit on it is bonding capacity. We're going to talk a little bit more about maybe some prioritization of the projects or some prioritization exercises, as well as trying to wrap up the facility master plan focus about where is it that we want to be in the next 10 to 15 years moving forward on the district. And so I believe that is it for tonight. So unless anybody had any questions or feedback, we would call it an end for the day.
Yes. Are there any questions? All right, meeting adjourned. I think our board president's having some technical difficulties. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Right now, but yeah.
There's
Yes, Stephanie, you have a question? Or are you saying bye? Bye.
I'm sorry, I'm saying goodbye. I've got children in the background, all sorts of things. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
I want to call attention to Susie March's comment. I think that's a really important point that we need to discuss at some point.
We can look at transfers into.
Yeah, we can't do it now because we've adjourned, but at some point I'd love to know